So many people say, I don't feel like myself anymore, without realizing the body has been living in survival for years. What if that feeling isn't failure, but a signal? Today's conversation is about remembering your original design and gently restoring alignment where stress and trauma once took over. Welcome to Soul Sparks, where we share conscience, illuminating conversations that reconnect us to inner truth and embodied wisdom. I'm Saima, and my guest today is our illuminating Cindy Costley, founder of the Underlying Answers and the creator of the Electromagnetic Body Desensitization Technique, or EBDT. Through her six frequencies of healing, Cindy bridges Western science, Eastern practices, spirituality, and scripture to help people release chronic stress and return to vitality, clarity, and calm. So today, we're exploring why so many people feel dysregulated and how alignment across all layers of being brings us home to ourselves. So, Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
You're warmly welcome. I'm glad that you joined, Cindy. So, Cindy, I'm curious when you look at people who feel overwhelmed or disconnected, so what do you see that they often don't recognize it?
That's such a beautiful question because my the biggest experience that I have with individuals is the disconnection between our mind and our body. We are a society that does so much beautiful mind work, right? We work on our mindset, we work on our emotions, we work on um, looking at the dysregulation that's happening mentally and how to resolve that. But we forget about the dysregulation that happens physically in our biology. And that is the missing piece for so many people.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And the way you explain that is really remarkable, Cindy. You know, that idea that the body is communicating, not malfunctioning shifts everything I feel. Now, many people believe stress and trauma are only mental experiences. So, what do we misunderstand about how deeply they affect the whole body?
It's so important to realize that we cannot think our way out of a biological safety response, right? When trauma happens, and trauma can be something really big that happened in our life or something really that to other people might seem small, but to us, our brain process it as something big. And what happens is trauma activates survival biology by triggering the sympathetic nervous system. So when, we look at stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline and inflammatory signaling, it changes all of it when we go through these high stress moments. And this response is adaptive in the moment and it's designed to keep us alive. It's working in a way that benefits us in the moment of the trauma. But then what happens is a lot of times our body gets stuck and our biology holds on to that trauma. And the body is doing exactly what it's designed to do during the trauma, which is prioritizing survival over repair, but it doesn't revert back into homeostasis. Instead, it holds on to that signaling and those messages that we were given during the trauma.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I really appreciate how you named that so clearly, especially the way you highlighted that trauma doesn't just live in the mind but actually lodges itself in the body, and the way you describe the body getting stuck really helps people understand why willpower or positive thinking alone often isn't enough, and it brings so much compassion to what people are experiencing instead of judgment, I would say. Now, building on that, through EBDT and the work you do every day, what do you see as the deeper pattern beneath chronic dysregulation and long term stress?
Well, what happens is when we go through different life events, and they could start at birth, the life events could start during the birth canal, right? Coming out if it's traumatic on the mom or the child or the baby, and then going through life, all these different traumatic events create patterns in our cells. And when trauma is unresolved, stress hormones remain elevated and our cells adapt to a threat based process and a threat based environment. So we end up in this repetitive threat based response processing as opposed to processing from a place of homeostasis, which is where we're meant to be. And this impacts our immune responses, mitochondrial energy production, detoxification pathways, hormonal signaling, brain body communication. It impacts all of it. And so what happens with EBDT is we go back and we restate, we change those cells back to their original state of homeostasis. So we figure out which methylation pathways, which cytokine structures, which hormonal imbalances or inflammation markers are out of balance because of each individual life event. And then we can go back and release that trapped emotion and the trapped energy that's in the body from the life event and retrain the cells to go back into a state of homeostasis knowing that you're now safe. So it takes us back to before that safety mechanism was put in place by our body because of the trauma.
Now, the way you describe that really makes, the whole picture come together. And seeing trauma as something that create patterns, like you said, across the brain and body, and not just, isolated symptoms, really helps explain why dysregulation can feel so persistent for people. Now, the idea of going back and, safely releasing those stored body emotions feels both practical and deeply compassionate, especially for those who have felt stuck for years. And the way you explain that is really great, Cindy. Now, how does this misalignment show up mentally, emotionally, or physically for people going about their everyday lives?
Everyone is so incredibly unique and different, and it shows up in a myriad of ways. There's thousands of different pathways in our body in which can come into dysregulation during a life event. And when it comes to, our brain, we have to remember that, or our cells, we have to remember that cells don't store memories the way that the brain does, because our brain holds our memories, but cells do store patterns of behavior, patterns of signaling, patterns of inflammation, the energy use that reflect our past experiences. And it can show up different for everyone. We all have kind of a unique way in which our body speaks to us through our trauma. So, for some clients, every stressor is processed through their thyroid and they have severe thyroid issues. For others, it's like for me, it was my mast cells, right? And I went into dysregulation with my mast cells. For others, it is mental and it's depression and anxiety. And for others, it's autoimmune diseases, inflammation. Our body will speak to us quietly at first and then louder and louder and louder through our symptoms. And how those symptoms show up for each and every one of us is very unique. But the message but the fact that the signals and the symptoms are actually messages is what's not unique to all of us. It's a language within our body. And if we can start looking at our symptoms as this beautiful language trying to tell us that there's some deeper dysregulation that needs to be healed, then we can really start getting down to the core of what's happening within us, even though what that looks like is so different for each of us. The message and the language is still trying to tell us something. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, that's such an important distinction you're making. That, while the experience of dysregulation is universal, the way it shows up is deeply individual. And like naming that cells don't hold memories and patterns, like you said, and that the brain is the organizing force adds so much depth to how we understand healing. I feel that it also honors the truth that no two nervous systems express misalignment in the same way, and that perspective alone can be incredibly relieving for listeners who have been, trying to compare the symptoms or experiences to others and wondering like why their healing looks different. Now, As we enter this, you teach the 6 frequencies of healing. Now, for someone listening right now, what's a simple way to begin restoring alignment across this layer?
Well, one of the things to recognize is that, first of all, the best messenger is our body. We can seek answers outside of us, and it's important to use those resources, right? I talk about Eastern practices and Western practices and looking at scripture and spirituality, and all of that is an important part of healing. So I would say that the number one tool we can do is really looking at, are we open-minded to something that's holistic? Are we also open-minded to Western medicine? Because some people have so much trauma in Western medicine that they don't allow themselves to utilize it at all, and sometimes our body needs that extra support. However, the answers are deep within us, and that's where healing begins. It's through the frequencies of energy within our system. So when I talk about the 6 frequencies of healing, we have to remember that healing doesn't happen just in one layer. The 6 frequencies reflect how trauma affects us spiritually, energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically, and behaviorally all at once. And when all layers are addressed, then healing can be accelerated. When we're open minded to looking at what's really happening within us and how energetically these traumas have impacted us with these 6 frequencies of healing, we can really truly start healing on a deeper level that brings us back to the way that we were meant to be, to our original design. We have to remember that science explains the mechanisms of trauma, but spirituality explains the meaning and the restoration of the human experience. So if we're only focused on the science and not allowing the meaning and the purpose of restoration and the belief system that we are capable of healing, that our body is this magnificent tool and resource for restoring itself, then we lose out on that level of healing. So when we really kind of allow ourselves to blend the spirituality and the science, then true healing is where true healing starts to evolve for us.
Mm-hmm. I really like about the way you describe this is how much compassion it brings into the healing process. Like by pointing people back to their own bodies as the most honest guide, and you're taking healing out of the realm of pressure and putting it into relationship with energy, like you said, with awareness and with choice, and your openness, to integrating, like you said, both holistic understanding and Western medicine also normalizes the idea that healing doesn't have to be one dimensional. It can be layered, responsive, and deeply personal, right?
Absolutely. It's really important to stop and look at, if I'm afraid of something holistic, where is that fear coming from? Because is that fear actually stopping me from healing? Because some of us feel like, if I were to do this practice, if I were to try this things, it could be Western or Eastern, depending on what our past experiences are. If we have a fear against one of those, we're actually blocking our own healing. And that fear is what's stopping us from incorporating the full balance of healing. When we look at, spirituality versus science, they're complementary. They're not in conflict of one another at all, right? Faith creates internal safety, and safety is the biological prerequisite for healing. If we don't feel safe, our body goes into this, it protects us with this safety mechanism that looks different for each and every one of us. And faith is what helps us to feel safe. Faith is what helps us to bring us back and release that safety, that fear of safety.
Absolutely, yes, yes, I completely agree with that. So, when old patterns, old stress patterns resurface, how can people stay grounded and continue healing instead of feeling discouraged?
I love that question. I think there's a couple pieces to that. One is, I call it the purposeful pause, is just taking a moment to say, okay, what am I feeling right now? We as humans have become pretty disassociated with our feelings. I know I was for over 30 years. I didn't know how to feel sadness or anger or, um, whatever. I didn't know how to feel it unless it was for other people. But it was for me, I could not feel my own sadness. I had blocked it completely, and it was all manifesting physically from my body. So the first thing that you can do is just start to get to know your body. Start loving on your body and say, what do you want me to know right now? What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to say to me? And be open minded to what those answers might be, because that's where the healing and the answers begin, is through our openness to feeling and talking to our body and communicating and getting to know our body. Now, I will say that there are some clients that I have to create, or I get to create, a remedy that reconnects their brain and their body, because some of us have disassociated so much as to not feel the pain that we also don't feel the sadness and the anger and the hurt. So the very first step is to really start to recognize that sadness is a part of us. Sadness is a beautiful part of the human experience, and it's okay to feel. Anger is okay to feel. What we do with that anger and that sadness is different. That's a different story. That's a different conversation. But the feeling of it is really important for us to process. And when we don't, we're just shoving it into our body, creating more dysregulation. So I would say the first step is just acknowledging that, taking that purposeful pause and acknowledging that, yeah, I'm feeling something right now, and being okay with it, honoring those feelings, honoring the sadness and the hurt and the anger and the grief that we're feeling. And that's the second part of it, is really recognizing that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. We push away pain so hard, and I'm not talking about physical pain, because of course nobody wants to be in physical pain. Nobody wants to be in emotional pain. But it is a part of the human experience. And when we fight against it, when we push against it, we're actually creating more dysregulation in our body, versus when we just allow it and accept it and be in it with the emotions. Our emotions only want to be acknowledged. And by acknowledging the grief of, I don't really want to be in this hard place right now. I don't really want to be suffering right now. I wish this had never happened. I wish that had never happened. Grieving the life that you wish you had is very normal and healthy, but it needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be a purposeful grieving, a recognition that, yeah, I really missed out on some things because I've been dealing with this. Or, yeah, I wish my life were different and had turned out different than the way it turned out. Those are emotions we push away, and we feel guilty sometimes even for having them, but they're very real part of the human experience. And when we let them in and we acknowledge them and we hug ourselves and we say, it's okay, we've got this, and we acknowledge, yes, I feel you, I hear you, pain, I hear you. It's okay right now, this is temporary. We start to move through it as opposed to trying to push past it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love how compassion is at the center of everything you're sharing, Cindy. The way you describe the purposeful pause feels like an invitation rather than an instruction, I would say. Like an invitation to slow down, to reconnect, and to, build a kinder relationship with the body instead of treating it like something that needs to be fixed. Acknowledging that sadness is a beautiful, natural part of us, like I said, and that it's truly okay not to be okay sometimes, like I said, can be incredibly relieving for people who have spent years judging their own emotional responses. And I feel there's so much wisdom in reminding us that healing doesn't mean the absence of difficult feelings, but the presence of self-love while we move through them, and you've explained that so beautifully. Now, as we warmly welcome, as we stay with this idea of gentleness and self connection, I'm really curious, when someone begins to allow their emotions instead of resisting them, what shifts do you often see in how they relate to themselves day to day?
Well, it's going to look different for everybody, because for some people, the emotional charge of not feeling their emotions is very physical. And for some individuals, it's more mental and emotional. So, what that's going to feel like is different for everyone. But the key is to remember that when the body feels safe, acknowledged, and loved, everything begins to recalibrate. Joy begins to find its way back into our lives. Peace begins to be seen and allowed within our lives. But when we're in a constant state of safety and protection, and I don't want to feel you because it's not safe to feel you. I don't want I don't want to think about that right now because that's too much to deal with from my past. All we're doing is keeping ourselves in this state of dysregulation as opposed to allowing our body to feel safe enough to recalibrate itself and go back to a state of homeostasis.
That makes sense. That really makes sense. I would say I really appreciate, how you emphasize that there's no single way this unfolds and that healing and a self relationship are deeply individual, like you said. And that shift alone can, quietly change how a person meets themselves throughout the day and how they speak to themselves, how they listen, and how they respond when something feels hard. Now, like, where can listeners learn more about your work and explore EBDT and the six frequencies of healing?
You can find me at theunderlyinganswers.com or any of the socials, the underlying answers. And yeah, there's lots of information there to dive into. You can even take a six frequencies of healing body audit to see how in touch you are with your own six frequencies of healing, which are, the energetic, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, and behavioral. And so there's lots of tools on the site to learn from and even to, like I said, take that body audit and see how connected are you really to your own self.
That's noteworthy, and that's going to surely be beneficial for all our listeners out there. So, thank you for joining us on Soul Sparks. And listeners, if today resonated, let it be a small reminder calm, clarity, and vitality are not something you earn, they're something you return to. Until next time, stay gentle, connected to what's truly within you.